And the Finance and Revenue committee is being called to order. Bernie Flynn is chair, Mr. William Scott, and Mr. Nick Allen. Department head Barbara Leone, finance director, and borough manager, Mr. Michael A. Perrone. Item number 2, the comments, suggestions, or petitions by residents in attendance regarding items that are not on the agenda. Does anyone in the audience have anything that they want to share? Seeing none, moving on to number 3. Advertise for the applicants to serve on pension committees. Mr. Perrone, are you going to handle that?
Yeah, this is jumping the gun a little bit. You'll have an ordinance next week that you'll be voting on to create the pension committees and their membership. So you have to do that first, and then after that ordinance, if council approves it, then this will be shown on your agenda to advertise for applications from applicants, borough residents to serve on the committee. Just giving you a heads up so we can get this going October and get the committee set up by the end.
Do you want us to approve it, to move forward with that since we're here? Okay. Correct. Mr. Allen, you okay? Mr. Scott? It's a 3-0 to move forward with the advertising. Number 4, consider approving the assumption changes for the 2021 actuary police pension valuation. The last meeting, we approved the non-uniform, and now this is the police pension.
That's correct, yes.
Thank you.
Scroll down a little bit. You can see some of the recommended changes are lowering the inflation rate from 2.75% to 2.50%. What was approved for the non-uniform pension last month was to keep the inflation rate at that same, the 2.75, to not change it. The other items 2, 3, 4, and 5 are relatively similar to what was approved last month for the non-uniform plan. Lowering the interest rate assumption from 7% to 6.75%. Number 3, changing the salary increase assumptions from 5% per year plus an additional 10% in the final year. Number 4 is updating the mortality assumptions from the RP 2014 mortality table. And number 5 is updating the disability assumption based on the 2010 SSA trustees report.
Yeah, we went through these pretty in depth with the people from Mackinac twice. And then, of course, our meeting with the mayor asked a bunch of questions. Mr. Allen had some questions in the very beginning. Are you satisfied with number 1, Mr. Allen?
If this is what the people who this for a living continue to recommend, accept that, regardless of how sensical it seems to me right now.
Yeah, the other important thing, if we follow these assumptions, we're potentially going to be in our pension funded in 85, 86%. So it's a good thing.
Mr. Perrone, in what period of time would that happen in? What period of time? We approve this. Will what year will the pension for the police be at 88% or 85%?
It may take 2 years. But these calculations will be used for next year's MMO.
Okay, very good. All right, that's a 3. Mr. Scott.
So, but this has changed what we.
No, what you voted on last month was the non-uniform pension plan. This is the police pension plan.
Number 6, consider approving the Truist Bank 3-year. Oh, I apologize. I checked it off because Mr. Scott said good. Review and approve the 2022 minimum municipal obligation for all pension plans as provided by Mackinac Benefit Group. Isn't this redundant?
This needs to be presented, and we do need this to be voted upon. This needs to go into the 22 budget. There's a requirement that it's approved and we an approval on it. If you look at the numbers,
No, it's not redundant.
Okay.
The first things you're doing is changing the assumptions. This is the actual calculations of the MMO, the dollar value that the borough is going to have to put in the budget for 2022. That's what you're approving. You accepted it, you've seen it as the governing body. That make sure that this MMO, the money, is going to be in the budget.
Now I understand. Good. Mr. Scott, you have any questions with that? Number,
Yes, this is the first time I've seen.
Looks great.
couldn't get any easier than that. Is that something you would run through your class, Mr. Allen, or is that too difficult numbers?
This might be a little bit much, but I can send you a lesson I do on marginal tax rates if you want. It's
Okay.
a good one.
All right, good. Thank you. All right, number 6, consider approving the Truist Bank 3-year custodial service contract for both pension plan at the cost of $107,004.
So it's important to note that we have had BB&T as our custodial for both the non-uniform and police pension plans. BB&T is now transitioning into Truist, and they have actually offered us a cost savings. Jeff, if you could open that email that I had sent you this evening. The cost savings are projecting to be about $101,000 over the contract. Email. I sent you an email. There should be another page that shows the cost savings. There's a separate attachment. Can you? So currently we're paying around about $69,000. This price plan is offering us reduced savings to put that back down to $35,000. So if you multiply that by 3 years, we would be about $107,000 versus $208,000 that we were paying pricing. So it's about $101,000 savings that we could potentially recognize with by entering into this agreement.
So what are we getting for this contract? They agree to what? Hold the funds, but also to manage them?
They provide all the custody services, so they are essentially, they're in charge of the funds. They're not managing them, but they are, processing the pension payments each month for all the pension years and processing any invoices that need to be paid out of the pension funds, as well as other custodial services.
All right, and what part do we play? Do you forward them any requests or payment and that kind of thing?
Yeah, we deal with them a lot each month, just on different issues.
But at their end, we're paying them that amount of money to,
And correct, that was coming right out of the pension funds.
uh-huh. All right. What's the name of the bank?
Truist.
Truist?
It was BB&T,
Yeah.
and now it's switching over to Truist. They've merged with Truist Bank.
Uh, Suspicious of any bank that calls itself Truist. But putting that aside, how did we get BB&T?
So since I've been here, the banks have kind of gone through a lot of mergers. It was at one point in time First National Bank, and then there was another merger after that, and banks have just continually merged over the years.
Well, every once in a while, shouldn't we shop which banks we're dealing with?
Yes, but I mean, this contract is paying half of what we've been paying before. The pension committee gets up and running, maybe something that they would, shop the custodial banks that.
So number one, it's a good deal on the face of it because they cut it in half in terms of what has to be paid. Number two, we can get somebody else to do the shopping. I'll go with that. 3-0.
Yeah, to take a step further, at our last meeting, Mr. Largus mentioned about the pension committee also looking at our capital reserves to try to see if we could get a higher return on those dollars as well. So the pension board committee is going to be pretty busy the first year or so, moving things around and making them work. So, you okay with it, Mr. Allen? So it's a 3-0. Number 7, August 2021 financials.
We could go to page 1, please. So looking at the month ended August 31st, 2021, actual revenues were $2,989,498. This is offset by actual expense of $3,811,410. This leaves us with a net loss for the month of $821,912. Going over to page 2. Looking at the year ended August 31st, 2021, actual revenues were $23,954,20. Actual expenses were $18,631,146. This left us with a net income year to date of $5,319,275. Scroll over to the right. So looking at the year to date, 8/31/2021 for the governmental funds, we are seeing some revenues within the police line items, the ordinance violations, police alarms, and restitution. Based on the trends that we're seeing with the monies coming in, we don't think that these will make budget by year end. We're projecting about $119,000 under budget on those revenues. As I've said in previous months' committee meetings, police overtime continue to be over budget each month, and we are projecting that to be over budget by year end by $35,000. Looking under building and housing, building permits are trailing year to date, but we do expect to make revenue on this line item at year end. Under the expenses for the housing department, land development is over budget by almost $12,000, but that is offset by billings that we bill back to the various developers for the invoices that we incur. Looking under the public works department, we're seeing service contracts are over budget by $41,000. We do believe there are some items within that line item that we can reclass, so we need to take a harder look at that line item. Damage claim fees are over budget by $34,801, but this is offset by monies that we receive for the insurance company for damages that are done to the vehicles. Highway maintenance is over budget by $110,000, and that is mainly due to the 2021 paving project. However, we did receive revenues from Aqua for street pavings that we used to spend on the 2021 paving project. Under the administration department, real estate taxes are on track to meet budget for the year. Currently, we're at $5.1 million received through 8/31. Our budget is $5.2 million, so we feel confident that we should make that line item. The 0.25 EIT pension rate, we're at $941,000 through 8/31. The budget is $1 million. That is expected to meet budget at year end, and we will transfer all that to the two pension funds by the end of the year. Business privilege tax is at $117,000. The budget for the year is $140,000, so that's another line item that we expect to meet revenue on. Looking at the expenses in the administration department, we are continuing to see the bank fees are increasing. Currently, they're about $10,000 over budget, and this is expected to continue to rise through year end. Going over to the recreation department, the Touch a Truck budget is over budget. The budget was $1,500. The actual expenses incurred were $3,297, which is 119% overspend in that line item. Looking under stream protection, our legal fees are over budget by almost $4,000. That may be expected to increase by year end. Looking at the enterprise funds, the sewer and parking, sewer revenues still are not meeting budget. They're trailing by about $553,000. We're hoping that this will start to be a catch-up now that the university is back in. Expenses are within the line item under the wastewater department. Looking at the parking fund, the parking income actually exceeded its budget for the first time this year in the month of August by about $6,000. While parking meters, they're still trailing budget by about $131,000. Violation of ordinances are still trailing budget by $42,000. Parking tickets were exceeding budget by $167,000. Looking ahead to year end, we need to continue to monitor revenues. Again, if we're not meeting our projections, that may mean we need to scale back on some expenses or hold off on certain items. Looking at the month of November, we have a large principal and interest payment that's due on the 2016 bond debt of almost $1 million. That affects both the general fund and the parking fund. In December, we have our MMO that is due by year end of almost $1 million. We have to pay back our short-term loan through Santander Bank of $2,550,000. We have longevity payments that are due to AFSCME employees. We also have health insurance payments that are due to employees. We have our HSA that is due as of the first of the year, and we also have vacation payouts. I did put some projections together since I always get questions where we think we're going to land for the year. And, you know, based on what the trends are and what the averages are, we're looking to be around about $100,000 to $150,000 over budget at year end, as of right now, based on the trends that we're seeing.
Mr. Allen, questions?
I do, yeah. So I know college is just getting back in, and that's where we're hoping to make up that $500,000 lag in our sewer rental fees. Do you think by next month that will provide enough of a trajectory to make a solid guess of where we'll be by year end on that line item?
I mean, I know that the university is in, but it's my understanding, I'm not certain that all of the businesses are back in our office buildings. So that could, throw a bit of a wrench into that. So, I mean, at this point in time, I don't have any numbers of anything that has come in for today's date for sewers, but I would certainly hope that it's going to trend towards the positive side.
Let's go back to the police overtime. Every month, we talk about the police being exceeding their budget for overtime. Fast forwarding to number 8, okay, which is the preliminary budget you're going to present tonight. At our last meeting, Chief talked about increasing the overtime for the police, get back to the either 2018 or 2019 levels, which makes sense based on things coming back to normal. With that increase, it's $35,000 right now, expected budget for police overtime. The increase of money, do we anticipate any monies going over the overtime budget when we're going to be reporting next year, since this is a almost normal year? What trend do you think we're going to be looking at?
I mean, I would think that since we are increasing that line item to make it more in line with previous years, that the hopes would certainly be that it wouldn't go over budget for 2022.
Thank you. It's just a question because, I mean, I don't want to use the word only 35,000, but we increased the line item for 2022, $100,000, I believe. So hopefully, the $70,000 will be the buffer that we need, going into 2022. So, thank you. Moving on to number 8, review the 2022 preliminary budget. Since the last time we met, the administration has done quite a bit of work on this budget.
Yeah, let me jump in before Barb gets into the nuts and bolts. From last Wednesday's meeting, the Finance Committee asked us to go back, look at all the line items again with all the department heads. When we did that, we also asked the department heads to prioritize their capital wishes. We've done that. We'll show you a slide that has all that information. And then myself, Sean, and Barb prioritized what the department heads prioritized, of things that we have to do. But I'm pleased to say that after meeting with the sewer folks, that the sewer budget is balanced. It's tight. Remember last year we had a slight sewer increase. The memo we got from the Financial Ad Hoc Committee or Subcommittee suggested that we do a 2-year bump. I would still recommend that. It's a small piece, but capital projects at the sewer plant over the next 5 years, if you remember when Sean and Michael Finley were in here, we're looking to spend $1.2 million every year in the next 5 years. Can't ignore it. Anyway, if the operating budget, we kind of were without increasing services, without hiring any new hires, S4. The operating budget is within range of being balanced. Probably a big help was meeting with Chief Moorhead and going over the number of personnel, the actual salaries a lot closer to reality. So that really helped. And then every department we met with, we went down and made tried to get as realistic as we could with revenue and expenses, so we could get a balance. We numbers both ways. At the end of the day, the capital stuff, and I'll let Barb take over from here, we'll show you the list. We're still short, but, if we didn't do any capital stuff or capital stuff in the general fund, we would be okay today. Any increases. So we're in a better place today than we were at least 2 months ago. We started the budget process, and that's what it's all about. We meet with the numbers, we chew them and chew them and chew them, and get to the point where they're ready to be swallowed. Let's put it that way. Barb, why don't you go over the capital? And I'd like council, the committee, to focus on the general fund capital stuff, so you can tell us, what you want in, what you don't want in. Just the budget. And if you don't have an answer tonight, that's okay. It's not pressing that we know exactly tonight. We have, after next week, we have 3 more months till the end of the year.
So if we could start on page 2, please. I just want to go over the summary. Looking at the general fund, the operating budget, based on the changes that were made, currently in a positive position of almost $284,000. This does not include any of the capital projects. So if you look at the second piece of this, we did go through and ask the department heads to kind of prioritize everything. And based on what, their suggestions were and meetings that we had within the administration department, the recommended capital expense total is $327,000. Yeah, I just wanted to start to show where we're starting with. So if we go over to page 3, you can see the items in yellow are the top priority items. If you look under the administration department, the green light go. This is part of a grant that is already in process. This is the borough match that we need to put into the budget to meet the grant requirements. Looking under the police department, we need to do the vehicle upfitting. This has to do with the signed enterprise lease agreement that is already in place. And this is additional cost that need to, get the vehicles upfitted for the department. Under the Public Works Department, it's imperative for the street light node installation of $150,000. And then under the IT department, if you scroll down, we have some servers that need to be updated at a cost of $15,000, switches that are needed that enhance our connectivity, new computers for various departments that fell off the schedule just with COVID and all the different changes that we've gone through, and then noise control for Borough Council at a cost of $34,000. So those are the items that are recommended as the capital budget for the general fund. And if you add up all those highlighted yellow items, we come up with about $327,000 of the absolute recommended items that need to be put into this budget.
Thank you, Ms. Leonti. Ms. Dorsey, since you're sitting with us, you were working with us last time, trying to come up with what we thought was necessary, what we thought wasn't necessary. Please chime in on what we're doing. Okay, it's important that 4 of us can come up with a great idea on what to do. All right. So to understand what's happening here, there's no new hires in the budget, and anything that's not in yellow is up for selection, but everything that is in yellow is deemed to be very important.
That's correct.
So if we want to add a master park plan for all parks at $100,000, that just drives the 327 higher, correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Allen and Ms. Dorsey?
But then, just just so you can read this the right way, each department, say Recreation Department, master parking plan for all parks, that's the top priority. Keith gave us, and then it goes second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth.
A quick question about the master park plan being twice. Is that just a typo or? Okay. Boom, 100K.
So I'll just say, thank you for going through and prioritizing the capital projects. Clearly, it made a big difference, right? We went from 700,000 to 300,000. And the master park plan, are we saying that we don't need that it's not in this number?
No, no one's saying none of this stuff is important. Is what the administration did after all the department heads prioritized things was things in yellow are things that they have to get done.
Sorry, there was a typo. Second master park plan is actually the Marshall Square Parks Pathways Plan. Small typo, sorry.
So team, we're here, as we sit currently, the general fund is much balanced. Everything that we do from this point on is going to add to an overage. Okay, so.
The other piece of the pie that I didn't talk, I know we talked a little bit last week about was, we do zero-based budgeting each year, but come January, we have 3 months worth of bills to come up with. We talked about that, and how do you come up with that money over time? And Sean was explaining it today, to Bernie, you can't, we're not going to come up with 2.5 million next year. The operating from January through March, or this year even. You have to find take away like small bites of the apple. So let's say everybody agreed to do everything in yellow here. That's 327,000. I would recommend that you try to raise 500,000 so we have a cushion for the end of the year going into the following year. If that is true, we end up with another $170,000. You put that in a cash account, and the following year you budget the same way. You try to bring in a little bit more revenue than what you're expending. But you'll be able to build that number up. They take 15 years to get there, but that's the way to do it. Small increments. Make sense?
So, all right, so, Ms. Dorsey, what's your opinion on the highlighted yellow, and do you think we need to add under the, see, I'm leaning towards, if we can't use, American Rescue Plan for cameras for the police, I think the $30,000 for cameras uptown are well worth it, because we're starting to get a lot more activity up there, and we have a lot of blind spots up there.
Well, there's a reason that was downgraded.
Right.
And Chief can talk probably a little bit more than I can, but we're having some issues with some of the cameras uptown, hardware and software, and they're still trying to figure it out. So even if you funded 30,000, it may not get done just because, we haven't figured out what the solutions are up there yet.
Mr. Flynn, to your point, maybe Mr. Perone, you can answer this. This does not include American Rescue funds, right? So we could, there's still an opportunity to identify areas where we could leverage those funds.
Absolutely, could. My suggestion was you let that money slide, let it. The borough administration to figure out a way that's going to comply with the law and provide long-term efficiencies and solutions to bigger problems in the borough as opposed to just balancing a budget on a yearly basis. I know that's, pie in the sky thinking, but I think that's where you need to get to with that.
And those funds have to be used by when? I know starting March 2021, but
Yeah, 2024.
A quick question. So,
Boy, council members, just chime in. because
Okay,
we're-
sure.
We're in a position now, we just accept what's in yellow. Got to raise 327,000, and then we got to decide if any employees are going to be added to that as well. Full-time employees or, so,
I did a lot of like bar napkin math, not realizing that there was highlights on the actual thing. I couldn't see it on my paper. I was over here going nuts, but, so that makes a lot more sense. So you're saying that if we just stick to this, that'll give us that cushion you were talking about. If we do, am I right?
yeah, we have to come up with, if we take everything in yellow, 327,000. What Mr. Perone is saying, what we should do is budget 500,000 capital projects and then see how it rolls throughout the year. And raise the necessary funds that, to cover the 500,000 plus new employees.
Okay, so just to make sure I'm on the same page. So from page 2, we, in the general fund, are up 283, and you're recommending budgeting, instead of the 327, go up to 500. Plan to spend 327. That's how we start getting our way to the first 3 months. Big fan of like that. I think that makes a lot of sense. Maybe, can I backtrack to the sewer, like later maybe, or do you want me to just go now?
Oh, good. You just, you need to do because, we're at the goal line to figure out what we're going to either go over or pick it.
I had a quick question about the meeting with the sewer fund. So you were saying like you met with them and that helped a lot. And they had kind of planned to spend 1.2-ish every year over the next several years. Did that meeting cut into that for 2021?
No, it did not. What actually helped is the Davis property that Kevin was talking about earlier tonight. Part of the remediation of that property is DEP is going to go in there and start pumping water into the ground, pumping it back out into a truck, cleansing it, and then they're going to take that water and dump it into our sewer system. They're going to dump somewhere between 20 to 30 gallons a day, 60,000 a day, a huge amount of water. It's going to go into our sewer system. DEP will pay us to treat that water. That's going to last 5 years. So that's going to be a nice little plug to the sewer operations. But after 5 years, it goes away, and that's what I mean. You still need to do these little incremental things, and that will help them pay for capital projects.
And
And
then,
the answer to your question is we didn't chop stuff out to, to
Okay, good.
eliminate capital projects.
okay, good. Because I just want to make sure they're getting what they need, so we can prevent things breaking in the future. And then another question I have is, I like the idea and I agree that doing a like small incremental sewer fund increase or sewer rate increase makes a lot of sense. When we're talking about raising enough revenue to get to that 500K mark, we're talking about property tax increase. Would, and I doubt this is the case, but would simultaneously increasing the sewer rate impact how much we would need to raise via property taxes, or because the sewer fund is separate, it would have no impact?
Yeah, that would have no effect. I mean, there are other opportunities, for, generating revenue. That's why I kind of gave you all the thing on the trash. I know, it's a sore subject to charge for trash. But even if you did a portion, that's another way of doing it. There's some efficiencies, I think, that could be gained in the bulk trash collection process that the borough does currently. One week out of the month, we send trucks around the borough. They go up and down every street and every alley, picking up large items that are left out, and we do that service free. Most municipalities, you have to call up, pay a fee for Public Works to come and pick up your bulk items. That's a user fee at that point. Folks that are throwing out big stuff, you pay for it. That would offset some of our trash collection fees and tipping fees, which would help you out also. Actually bring more revenue to the borough and get some of the property taxes in the future. But that might be a conversation that we get to early next year. I don't think it's something we could pull this quick.
And then looking at page, I know this is kind of far ahead, but page 22, which is the last page. This is, I can come back to this later if you want. I'll just keep it rolling if you're cool with that.
Page 22 is the answer to the dollars that we have to raise. Ms. Leonti did a calculation for us to see how we would have to cover it. So we jumped ahead to the back of the book.
All right, so I'm going to do a quick calculation here.
Barbara, this was your old calculations on the police, right?
No, this was a calculation that I did today, just assuming if all of the capital projects were going to be funded at the $700,000, that would make the general fund out of balance by about $500,000. And what would we need to increase the taxes by to make up that difference? That was what that scenario is for.
So if we were to do what Mr. Perone's recommending, do that $500 budget, expecting to spend whatever that was, 327, we would then be out of balance by around 216 is the number I came up with. So that would be, if we did half of what this does, then that would, by my mind, kind of fix everything. We did half of what's on page 22, assuming we don't do any of these capital projects that aren't essential. So I'm looking at page 22 and it says that's going to raise, if I'm interpreting this correctly, $512,000 is what we would expect this to raise. And based on that plan to spend $500K on capital, we would need to raise $216,000. And that's where I'm.
Yeah, that as the calculation says up there, instead of 327, go to 512. Need to increase taxes roughly about 8%. Cover everything. That would come down to about $93 a year per house. Yeah, and that way there we have the money to do any capital project, the projects that we outlined in yellow. And then we'd have our cushion move into 2023. Okay, all right.
To-
Cash. Yeah. Following year. The fund, the first 3 months of the 2023.
So, I mean, what I'm thinking is if we also want to do a sewer rate increase, we potentially wouldn't need to do that full 8%. Because this is assuming we do all the non-essential stuff. If I'm right? And we're going to be
Well,
doing
both,
less than that.
they're separate from one another. We are doing some of this, the wastewater treatment stuff on the,
No, this is just for the general fund.
okay, yeah, they're totally separate then. Yeah.
Yeah, it's more raising property taxes 8% and raising sewer rates at the same time, where we could potentially raise property taxes, like take that down to 5%. And then we could still, I think a sewer rate increase would be a little bit more palatable if we were to reduce the 8% down to something like 5 or 4 even. Because if we went down to just 4, we'll call that 250,000 for the sake of even numbers, because it would be half of that, which would be a little more than enough to do that 500,000 in capital that we're talking about, which I think makes sense. And personally, I like to play things conservatively, so doing something like 4, 4.5, 5% instead of the 8 makes sense to me. But
Why-
strictly speaking, we could get away with probably around 3.8%.
Well,
roughly.
why don't we do your calculations and have administration do it to see how it looks on Tuesday next week? Because the understanding of
And if we could talk about, I know that they're obviously totally separate, but just from, a constituent concern viewpoint, I think it would be a good idea just to have that, if we want to go along with a sewer rate increase, to already be kicking around I don't know if we've talked about that number yet, but what that percentage would need to look like as well, just to get the big picture for residents.
Ms. Dorsey, you have anything?
No, I were actually on the same page because I was comparing what we looked at last Wednesday to this, and it's the same increase, but we have the same deficit, so.
Mr. Scott, good evening.
Hello. Page 22, it's almost identical last week. Is it still operative?
So page 22, right now, the operating budget is in balance. It's actually slightly over. So what I did on page 22 was assume that, council would choose to fund every capital project that was on that page. And that was around $795,000. So if you take that 795 and subtract what the general fund is over budget by, would come out to be about $500,000 off. That's where these calculations are coming from. And yes, they're very similar to what projected increase was last week.
Oh, just do the yellow. What would the GF out of balance by line?
If we just did the $327,000, which were the recommended projects, we'd still be out of balance by about $43,000.
For 3,000?
43,414. So 43K.
Okay, which is obviously a lot less than 512. 512,000. So just do the yellow. Need to fuss with a tax increase, do we? Huh? Well, what happened here? Without capital budget, I don't know. Did you cut things from the capital budget, not the capital budget, but the operating budget that we last week?
Yeah, that's what I said in the beginning. We went line item by line item, the operating budget,
Yeah.
every department head. Double check projections for revenue, double check expenses all across the board.
How much money did you save, or how much did you figure?
I don't know, all I do is I go line item by line item. I go, Barb, push the button and see where we end up.
What happened when you pushed the button?
Well, last week it was out of balance by about $455,000. Now we're over budget by 283, so,
You mean over budget, you mean?
meaning there's excess. The revenues are in excess of the expenses.
For 2022.
Correct, and that would only be in the operating. That's without any capital.
Okay, so you whacked enough so that we could afford yellow. Balanced it that way. Should we be doing what you did there and cutting things out? Cut too much out, or cut out of the operating budget that shouldn't have?
But we didn't cut anything out. We refined the numbers. No, we did. And the perfect example is we met with, as I said earlier, we met with, Jim, and we looked at the salary line on patrolman. And we took a hard look at that, and it's a tough number to come up with. There's moving parts. You have police officers retire, some are out, some are not out. And then you have, it takes, if you have one retires, two retires, and it takes, say, 6 months to hire somebody, you're not paying the salary for 6 months for potentially a couple officers. So we tried to look at those types of things.
Well, thank you very much. Apparently you did come up with better numbers. All right. Let me ask you this, page 3, capital fund projects. Is this a list of all of them as they were? Best list of capital fund projects?
So on page 3, you'll see all the general fund projects. And then on page 4 are the sewer, the parking, and,
I mean on page 3. They're what we had last week?
yes,
They are. Okay, and so a lot of them are not to be. So we should look at this, see if there are some there that we think ought to be.
And I would suggest, take your time looking at it. We can talk about it next week, and we have, a couple more months to look at.
But the exercise is essentially, what you did, as we suggested last, was prioritize these. Say, you yellow lined it. And that's
Well, I did that, but each department prioritized what they wanted.
what I'm saying.
And I yellowed what we really, here's the bare minimum.
what we should really look at and see if something else should be in yellow. I know that would throw the balance, but
What do you, is there something specific, Mr. Scott, that you're rallying for?
not at all.
No?
I just want to know what I'm doing here. I think I get it.
For,
Look,
for example, Mr. Scott, I was in favor of spending an extra $30,000 to put cameras uptown.
right.
That, or putting it into the budget that we had the 30,000 for the police department. Once we get the other cameras synchronized, we would have the 30,000 to install the new cameras. But if we add the 30,000, that sends it to $357,000, and now we need to come up with more money.
Okay, but again, this is what we should be looking at. Okay. Got it. So you're presenting us with a 2022 budget, basically in balance. How far is it out of balance? Looks.
Jump in again if I can. I'm personally kind of in favor of putting in at least putting in the picnic benches at various parks. Give some love to the parks, at least something. Um, yeah, and then I have like a more of a philosophical question that predates my time on council. So I understand that it's been a big goal at the end of each year to move some money into the capital reserve fund, which has happened, right? Oh, it happened once.
Yes. it was.
Okay, that's good to know. So, trying to think like why was that prioritized over trying to get this like on hand cash for the first 3 months?
Question.
I'm curious, and from a
For years, the borough used to just get it's only $1 million tax anticipation note. And as it grew, as your operation grows, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. The tax anticipation note to a small term loan, short-term loan. So I think that's what's pushing me to prioritize that. 2.5 is too much, to borrow every year. It cost, like this year, it's costing us $50,000 to borrow that. It's a waste.
So on my, and then I think the question that leads to is that, $2.5 million that we're spending 50K a year on, if we continue this practice, is that more money than we would be making on that $2.5 million as it would sit in the capital reserve fund?
That's a good question. And we haven't done that exercise. Because another potential is we could do it a bunch of different ways. We could borrow the 2.5 from the capital and pay ourselves interest, but, you got to put the money back by the end of the year.
Can I ask why?
Why? We have to, but we just had, Borough was just re-rated by Moody's. We have that 8 million that's in there is our cushion to have a good bond rating. They said, actually, it should be more. It should be raised up between 12 and 15 million. They said, don't spend any more than that. That's why. It's financial advice from Street.
The other thing that we have to consider other than with this, because it was on the table last meeting, was the 3 employee asks. I keep going back to that, which will add to the ask at the end of the end. Give it any thought at all to Parks and Recreation, Building and Housing, 2, and then Parks and Recreation is looking for 1. And all employees cost a lot of money, so that would go to to add to the 327. So it's another thing that we have to keep chewing on. All right, the administration is going to come back to us on Tuesday with some percentages and numbers for us. So do you want to just move on to the minutes? All right. So
Now, general fund capital projects. Capital, what was the account you were talking about, Nick? We're talking about the reserve fund, the cap, oh, the water. That's different.
okay. Moving on to number 9, approve the August 2021 minutes. Any issues, Mr. Allen? Ms. Dorsey, you or Mr. Scott? Okay. Any other business? Adjourned at 8:06.